Okay. So this is Nudges and Hard Choices by Sarah Zoe Raskoff in Bioethics. So yeah, this is received June, revised in July, and accepted in August. That's amazing. Okay, so what is going on? And yeah, and what we're doing is autonomy, choice architecture, incomplete preferences, and nudges. Now, here's the thing, like, just from the get-go, this is an important topic because this is what is going on constantly online, where you are presented different choices, like in a search result in certain ways, or where they're trying to get you to click on the links. So in search results, Google wants to give you useful search results so that you will click on links, but they also give you advertisements, and so they give you advertisements in a certain way because that's how they make their money, and they want you to also click on the advertisements. So how do they do that? Well, this is the thing. In nudges, generally they present these things to nudge you to click someplace or another, and this is a big deal because if they keep presenting you with certain things, they can get you to change your preferences over time because, you know, propaganda works. It does. That's the whole point. And that's basically what advertising is on a very small scale, is it's propagandizing you to do something that the advertiser wants you to do. Now, this one here is, of course, in bioethics, so maybe it's going to be talking about it in medical contexts. So that's where that's what's interesting about this. Okay. So anyhow, nudges, the basic case. One aim of medical care is to benefit patients, to restore the health of those who are ailing from sickness or disease and leave them better off than they would otherwise be. This idea is captured by the principle of beneficence. Who the fuck is... what's the principle of beneficence? I mean, they got the principles by... It looks like a textbook they're referencing, but like, okay. But I mean... It's like, isn't that basically the whole thing? Is like, don't be a jackass? But whatever. Okay, I don't know what the principle of beneficence is. Continuing, excuse me. But there is a general consensus in both medical ethics and the law that the principle of beneficence is constrained by the principle of autonomy. Most people know what they value and what sorts of trade-offs they are willing to make, say, between comfort and longevity. They have the capacity to assess the options available to them and make decisions that align with their values. While healthcare providers should try to improve the health and welfare of their patients, they must do so in a way that respects patients' capacity to decide for themselves based on their values. They must respect their patients' autonomy or capacity for rational choice. Yeah, I mean, this comes up all the time. Like, everyone should have a, maybe not if you're young, but if you're old, you should, even middle-aged, you should get yourself a will or just have some sort of outline so that if you get yourself into a big medical problems and you are unable to tell people what you want, people could know what you want. So like, if you don't want to be resuscitated with extreme measures because you basically would be unconscious for the rest of your life, for like the next 5 years, they might keep you alive like on a ventilator, but you wouldn't know what's going on. You might say, I don't want that sort of extreme measure where they're keeping you alive on machines, but you have no consciousness, or you just won't be able to do anything. So this is a very normal sort of medical and legal decision that face people. And it's important because this happens to basically everyone, as long as you live long enough. But recent findings in behavioral economics call into question the extent to which people left to their own devices succeed in autonomously or rationally choosing for themselves. The trouble is that we are less capable of assessing and choosing options that align with our values or preferences than philosophical discussions of autonomy typically presuppose. For example, if you inform a patient that a medical operation has a 10% chance of failure, they are significantly less likely to agree to it than if you inform them that it has a 90% chance success rate. This is puzzling because the two statements are logically equivalent, and a perfectly rational person would treat them as such. But we are not perfectly rational. The presentation of options affects our evaluation of choices and the decisions we make. More generally, we are subject to many biases that predictably influence decision making. For example, we tend to assign greater importance to present rather than future gains and losses, to be more averse to losses than we are keen on gains, and to privilege the current state of affairs or status quo. Since different biases may be stronger or weaker depending on how options are presented to us, our choices significantly depend on the presentation of options of what some call choice architecture, and often in surprisingly impactful ways. Yeah, so this is the big deal. This is how most online politicking and a lot of advertising work, is by presenting you different options in certain ways, architecting the way you see it on the screen and what they say to get you to, choose to do something, either to click on, let's see, what's it say? I'm looking at the notes here, very small. Okay, these are all talking about bioethics, but the big deal here is that this is how a lot of other things go too. Nudges are I don't know if it's still a buzzword in like Silicon Valley, but this is what they manufacture video games to do, to pay to win video games, where they want you to keep throwing money through microtransactions in them. And so what they do is they manufacture your choices in there so that you're always just needing to spend a little bit more money to get to the next area. I remember a nice breakdown when the Diablo Immortal came out, which is the portable version of the Diablo franchise, which I love the Diablo franchise. Diablo 2 is one of the games I have the most time in. Hey, Evolve Yourself, what's up? How you doing? We were reading some bioethics about, now you might know about this, like nudges and hard choices, how, systems are developed basically to present choices to make you choose in certain directions, one way or the other. And this is in bioethics. So we're talking about medical decisions and nudging people to make medical decisions, given like certain framing of the medical data. So that's what we're looking at right now. We just started basically. So we just here, and I'm only to right here for right now. So we're only we're still in the get-go. We're still getting there. So how you doing anyway? So let's give a little shout out here to Evolve Yourself. And there we go. Everyone go check him out. Also, we can try the integrated one, which if you are not currently following Evolve Yourself, you will now see a box where you can one-click follow at the top of your chat, which is one of the few things Twitch has done. But this is the thing. Right here is an example of a way to make people to, engage more on the website. They made it so you could one click. Now, if you can make the decision easier, you can get people to click on that. So instead of having to click on the link in chat and then, go to their page, of course, you can always keep in mind, you can also click on their, what's it called? The emote that he put, the Evolve Yourself one, and then it will also pop up a way to follow and subscribe there. But this is exactly what we're talking about. How do you get people to change their decision making with these little changes and presentation? Your Evolve Yourself says, you're right, saw some crazy shit go down yesterday. Met the most insane drunk dude I've ever encountered. Oh, wow. That got to be something. You're in Chicago, and you've already seen some crazy shit. So, if you saw some really crazy shit, that's actually really crazy shit. I know being in New York, I felt bad. I was so annoyed. Someone was blocking the subway, and there was only one exit, so everyone was going really slow. I was like, this person better be fucking dead. And the guy was on the ground bleeding from the head, and I felt bad. I'm just stepping over his body. I'm just that motherfucker blocking the subway thing, and I'm feeling bad about this afterwards. I'm like, there was literally nothing I could do, because people were already there helping him as much as he could be helped. People were on the phone calling the paramedics, but was he drunk and he smashed his head and was bleeding from the head profusely? Yes. And I'm just annoyed I can't get off the goddamn subway. But yeah, so if you saw some crazy shit, I believe you. I still feel slightly bad about that guy. It's there was nothing I could do, but it's maybe I've been here too long. Okay. Well, if you want to tell me what the crazy shit was, you let me know. You can throw it in chat, but I'm going to continue. I'm sure it'll take you a second to write it out if you want to. New York. Recognizing the effect of choice I have not gotten my Twitch notification that I've gone live from Discord. So I wonder if my bot is down. I need to fix that. And then another Twitch streamer just sent me a message, and it's funny, but nothing to do with my stream. Okay. Recognizing the effect of choice architecture on decision making has led many to endorse the use of nudges. A nudge is a small change in the choice architecture that makes a predictable impact on the decisions we make. A classic example of a nudge is changing the location of food items in a cafeteria so that healthier items are at eye level. And that's what I was just saying about the Twitch thing. Blue 174, hello, what's up? How you doing? Yeah, it says your first time chat. Like, this is what I do is I read and review academic philosophy stuff. I hope you're doing well. You're doing all right. That's good. Yeah. So if you have questions about like academic writing, we have Evolve Yourself, who is just chatting before you. He is also a philosopher. He also does on his stream does meditation and chess also. So you can go get a whole full mind body workout there. But yeah, if you have questions about writing, philosophy at least, you can ask about that stuff too. But yeah, so we're reading something on biomedical ethics, and we see how this goes. But yeah, this is what I was just saying about the new shout-out feature on Twitch. Oh, you're into more fictional fantasy? We have talked about stuff like that, what it is to be real and stuff. But yeah, we have other writers here. Evolve Yourself, this guy, Gary, was going crazy at your friend's bonfire. He tried to fight just about everyone there, and then was taken away by the cops. Then he broke a bottle into my friend's house at 3 a.m. while she was in bed and took a bottle of tequila. He broke into your friend's house. Yikes. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, because if you're trying to fight everyone, that's a problem. It's one thing if you want to fight someone, like, that guy pissed me off, I want to bash him in. I can understand you being annoyed with somebody, but if you're trying to fight everyone, then you've got like a bigger problem because, if it's the old thing, if everyone's an asshole, everyone isn't actually an asshole. You're the asshole if everyone's the asshole. And so that guy's got problems at that point. And yeah, breaking into your friend's house at 3 a.m. while they're in bed is not cool. Like, it's one thing, like maybe your friend would have given him the tequila, but yeah, see, if he literally wanted to fight everyone, that's a very bad thing for Gary. Because that means he's got problems. Yeah, because you don't want to fight everyone if you're in a right state of mind. You might want to fight some people depending on if that's what you do. You fight people, but like fighting everyone's a problem. Yeah, so that's not good. Yeah, so so there's a thing. You can also think about this, like just speaking of writing, when you organize your paper, like when you're organizing like a paper like this where you're writing a paper for consumption, you have to set up your you have to set things up in fiction, in philosophy, in any kind of writing. You have to use the tools you can to set yourself up. So this is what they're doing right here. They're giving examples from different areas, like so healthier items at eye level. On Twitch, the shout out feature where it pops up at the top of chat, again, they're making that easier for you to engage with the follow feature in Twitch. And so this is the thing, you move choices to different areas in people's visual like field, and that is actually very helpful for architecting their behavior. Okay, so the author says, healthy options are better for you, and many people sincerely claim to value eating healthier, but perhaps due to weakness of will, fail to make food choices that align with or promote this value when the time comes to eat lunch. It turns out, however, that simply making healthy options more salient significantly affects the choices people make. People are more likely to choose healthy food when it's right in front of them. Yeah, see, if you make it easy to follow someone on Twitch, it works. And so you can look at a lot of the things that are done on websites in this way. So nudging people in this way seems to benefit them without compromising their autonomy. They are still deciding for themselves and now in alignment with their own values or preferences. This strikes many as morally better than more restrictive ways of influencing choice, such as significantly raising the price of unhealthy foods or removing them from the cafeteria altogether, which intuitively infringe autonomy by restricting the menu of options. If someone really wants to eat something unhealthy, the option is still available. Nudges then are supposed to be an effective and morally acceptable way of influencing choice. Some nudges benefit third parties, for example, nudging people into being organ donors by changing the default option. People retain the choice not to be organ donors, but have to opt out rather than opt in to organ donation when filling out forms for their driver's license. But most paradigmatic nudges, and the sorts of nudges I will focus on here, are intended to benefit the person who is nudged. Thaler and Sunstein call such nudges libertarian paternalist. These nudges are libertarian because they do not infringe autonomy, but paternalist because they benefit the person who is nudged. Okay, what the fuck kind of meaning is this of libertarian? Now, I understand libertarian because they do not infringe on autonomy. So this is interesting. They do not infringe on autonomy. This is a particular kind of sense of autonomy. Where is the autonomy in what we get ourselves to look at? When you are taking up my visual space, and this is a point from, what's it called? Actually, it's from street art. It's from aesthetics, where you have people who spray paint the world. The question is, who gets to control what the world looks like? Is it the corporate overmasters and, basically they're paid people who criminalize street artists and graffiti artists? These are highly criminalized activities. Like, you can get a terrible, and I mean terrible, sentence for spray painting a wall compared to assault. Like, you will get more time in jail sometimes for spray painting than assaulting a person. And so who gets to control what is getting seen? And so the idea that just by showing people different options is not infringing autonomy, yeah, it's crazy, some of the laws about street art. Like graffiti laws are like completely out of whack, like insanely. I think, rape is, of course, in the United States not as they let people off for rape for really, it's really bad. And so certain graffiti laws, actually, graffiti is worse punished than rape in some jurisdictions. Hey Valpo, how you doing? Welcome in. So, but this is the thing. But the question is, who gets to control what people see? And so the idea that showing people options is not not affecting their autonomy I actually don't know if that holds even under libertarian. It's a very particular sense of libertarian. Yeah, Valpo, we're reading something on nudges, in terms of getting people to choose certain things, and this is in bioethics. So we're talking about nudging people to make medical decisions. So, talking about autonomy right now. Yeah, so the nudges are libertarian because they do not infringe autonomy, and I'm not so sure about that, but that's what the claim is. But paternalist because they benefit the person who is nudged, because the doctor's trying to get the person to, make the medically approved decision. In the medical context, such nudges seem to provide a way to thread the needle between the principle of beneficence and the principle of autonomy. If physicians want to benefit their patients while still respecting their autonomy, nudges seem the perfect choice. Hard choices, the problem. The case for certain nudges seems unassailable. Automatically scheduling a patient's medically necessary follow-up appointments but leaving open the choice to decline is a good way to increase the odds that the patient returns for further medical care. This benefits them and does not infringe on their autonomy. If anything, such nudges may even promote autonomy, at least on the reasonable assumption that the patient prefers to receive the treatment in question but might absent-mindedly forget to follow up. The exercise of autonomy, I will assume, involves choosing for oneself and in line with one's own value preferences. Nudges leave a person free to choose for themselves, and well implemented, nudges can help align a person's choices with their values, leading them to make better choices. But nudges are more worrisome in the absence of this alignment. Most obviously, a nudge might lead someone to make a choice that is contrary or incompatible with their values. For example, it isn't justifiable, at least on libertarian paternalist grounds, to nudge someone into treatment option that will prolong their life with extremely severe side effects, when they would prefer to die with dignity. Such a nudge makes it less likely that a person's choice reflects or promotes their values. And this seems problematic, at least on the assumption that respecting someone's autonomy means enabling them to make a choice that is the best option overall, given their values. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. If you are nudging people away from end-of-life decisions that would most people think are good, because may say, you know, you don't like the idea of, you think all life should be, you know, preserved as long as possible. But I mean, that's not everyone believes that. You don't want to, many people do not want to be in a vegetative state. And so it's like, but that would also mean they're dying sooner. But yeah, if you're nudging people for some other reason, then it seems like it's not aligning. Another way a nudge might conflict with autonomy, however, has not been adequately appreciated. A nudge might lead someone to make a choice that isn't incompatible with their values, but rather is undermined by them, in the sense that the options available relate to the person's values in an interesting way. The person prefers one in some respects, the other in other respects, but has no all things considered preference between the two. Following Levy and Chang, we might call decisions with this structure hard choices. What is special about hard choices isn't merely that the chooser prefers each option in certain respects, but rather that they have no settled trade-off rate between those respects. They therefore have no all things considered preference between their options. This is what makes their choice hard. All right, now this is sounding more like the political situation where, at least in the United States, what the political parties are a lot of times trying to do is identify people who have or who are on the fence and that can be nudged one way or the other because they don't know if they're going to vote for, you know, the Republican or the Democrat, and so they're on the fence. And if they can get to these people, then they can sort of like employ this nudging strategy to see if they can get them to, you know, vote the way they want them to. So, at least in an important class of cases, when someone is confronted with hard choice, nudging them one way rather than another looks different than it does in cases where one option either aligns with that person's values or else is incompatible with them. Here, the idea that respecting someone's autonomy requires enabling them to make a choice that better aligns with their values is unhelpful because, by hypothesis, the decision is such that our chooser's values do not specify one alternative as best. One aim of this paper is to suggest that medical contexts often involve hard choices of this sort, and that these hard choices are often furthermore high stakes or momentous in the sense that they involve choices about values that are deeply personal and important. I mean, yeah, like life and death things, of course, and, you know, like having kids versus like your own health and things like that. So, like, how do you quantify the ability to have kids versus, you know, a medical procedure that might, you know, like take away that ability that you have now, but might save your life? Like, you could do something very risky and try to save your life and the ability to have kids, but like these are like legit choices people have to make. So the second aim is to suggest when it comes to momentous choices, choosing autonomously requires reflecting on the decision, settling the trade-off between one's values, and so arriving at an all things considered preference. I call this kind of autonomy formative autonomy and argue that nudges sometimes interfere with it in an ethically objectionable way. Here is the basic idea. When faced with momentous choices, patients do not have a settled all things considered preference that a well-placed nudge can promote. What makes the choice hard, after all, is precisely that the person's values do not resolve the question of what option they most prefer. In such cases, to choose an option is to choose or settle one's preferences and so commit oneself to being someone who values in a particular way. Choosing not only options that better satisfy our preferences, but also our very preferences themselves, and is a distinctive exercise of autonomy. Nudging people in these contexts can infringe their autonomy by precluding them from autonomously settling their preferences in a way that nudging them into taking the means to their ends does not. Since medical contexts are rife with momentous choices, we must be sensitive to them when designing choice architecture in medical settings. The rest of the paper will flesh out this basic line of thought. I'll begin by introducing two different accounts of decision-making, the standard and non-standard model, and explain how they relate to libertarian paternalism. I'll argue that while libertarian paternalists tend to adopt the standard model, it cannot accommodate the possibility of hard choices. The non-standard model can make sense of hard choices and so make space for an important exercise of autonomy, the act of settling one's preferences. Next, I'll explain why nudges threaten this sort of formative autonomy and make plausible the claim that medical contexts often involve choices that are not only hard but momentous. Nudges are an important tool, and my suggestion isn't that we abandon them in medical contexts, but are merely that the standard way of thinking about when nudges are justified ignores an important aspect of autonomy. Alright, and if people haven't realized this yet, like in the United States, I can almost guarantee you that we've got medical clinics that are trying to get patients to do certain things according to their views. Like some people are going to push people away from abortion because they don't believe that abortion is right under any circumstances. And so if you're running a religious-based medical center that has this in principle, they are probably doing everything in their power, including nudging people from getting abortions. Now, I'm not claiming at this point if that's like right or wrong. I'm just saying this is probably actually in practice right now in these sorts of places, because they're going to have like an all front press to keep people from having abortions, and this is going to be part of their strategy, or I suspect it was. And if it isn't, they're gonna get on it soon. It's like they're not listening to me. They don't need my advice. They're going to be figuring this out for themselves. They're not stupid. Okay, and as always, I know people haven't been asking questions, but let me know if you have questions about like any of the concepts or whatnot, or even the writing for that matter. If you're still here, Blue, so let me know. The standard model. In the next two sections, I'll contrast two ways of thinking about autonomous choice, focusing exclusively on those who are sufficiently informed and meet the requisite clinical standards to count as capacitated. A key idea here is a preference. To say that someone prefers option A to option B is to say that they take A to be more desirable or choice-worthy than B, where I understand preference as describing all things considered verdicts between options. Such all things considered preferences are often depend on a person's plurality of more specific values and the trade-off rates between them. Someone may prefer A to B because A better promotes one value, B it promotes another, and one finds the former weightier in this context. Preference then is comparative. It describes a relation between options. On the standard model, for any domain of options, we can speak of a person's preference ordering over those options. Crucially, an ordering is complete. For any two options, A and B, a person either prefers A to B, prefers B to A, or is indifferent between A and B, in the sense they deem A and B exactly equally good. Alright, and so you should also realize that like if there's A, B, and C, then you could have like circles, like loops, where you have like A is more preferable than B, and B is more preferable than C, but then C could be more preferable than A. So things like that, if you're gonna do the math here, it can get very nasty. But like if we're only doing two options, it's a lot easier. I mean, you have either they're equal, one is more preferable than the other. But yeah, if you're getting rings, rings cause trouble. Let's put it that way. Okay, the standard model provides a straightforward picture of rational and autonomous choice. Starting with rationality, suppose Alex is out to brunch with friends and is mulling over available entrees. The restaurant has two options, pancakes and oatmeal. The two options cost the same, but Alex cares about both taste and health, and while the oatmeal is healthier, she finds pancakes tastier. So what should she choose? Well, according to the standard model, the answer is simple: whichever she prefers. Alex, by hypothesis, has a complete preference ordering over any options she encounters, which is generated by her settled trade-off rates between her values. In this case, the trade-off between taste and health. So, for example, it may be that Alex cares enough about health that the difference in health between pancakes and oatmeal outweighs the difference in tastiness between the two, and she prefers the oatmeal. Then she rationally ought to choose the oatmeal. Yeah, and so you'll also notice in these sorts of situations that we're talking about things that are not always so obviously rankable. Like if I asked you very quickly, like, would you prefer $10 if I gave you $10, or would you prefer if I gave you $20? Which one would you choose? Now you see, in this case, we're comparing money to more money, and clearly people want more money rather than less money. Now we're talking about taste versus health, these are not obviously rankable, but we're assuming that they're rankable in some way. But of course, that's going to break down very quickly. But under the obvious view, the standard model, you can do that. Oh, excuse me. And I prefer that my neck does not get stiff. Okay. In this model, then, Alex chooses rationally when she chooses what she most prefers from the options available. Choosing rationally is just choosing what one most prefers given one's settled preferences. See, it's like everything's settled here. Settled preferences. Now, not everyone is so rational. For example, Alex might choose the pancakes out of weakness of will or because they are more salient. Yeah, I mean, if you got like a big thing that says, eat the pancakes, maybe you'll be like, I will eat the pancakes. In these cases, a well-designed nudge might help Alex to do the rational thing and order the option she already prefers. This does not infringe Alex's autonomy because it does not infringe the exercise of her capacity for rational choice. In fact, it improves it by helping her to choose the option she already prefers most prefers, and so would choose if she didn't suffer from the weakness of will or salience bias. You see, this is the thing. Weakness of will or salience bias. Why are we thinking that there's in this case, we're defining the idea that she has a settled preference, and that's what she should rationally choose. I'm not so sure that's like the right way of thinking about rationality. Again, because I'm thinking that things that pop up in front of your face might do so because they are like, if like the restaurant really makes good pancakes and they want people to know that, then like maybe just having it big is it's a good point because they're super tasty, and so she will not be irrational for choosing the pancakes because they are extra tasty pancakes, and she'd prefer the extra tastiness over the healthiness. But like this is what these are things that worry me. I don't think that worries is actually a problem here, but these are things going on in my head when I see these acrasia arguments where it says weakness of will because it's like shiny and blinky, and you're like, oh, it's shiny and blinky and I like it. Well, I don't know. Shiny, don't discount being shiny and blinky. Like the blinking lights, it's like Twitch, video games, it's good. Okay. Since healthy food is in fact better for Alex, this nudge counts as libertarian paternalist. It benefits her without infringing her autonomy or capacity for rational choice. This isn't to say that any way of influencing people's choice to get them to choose more preferred options counts as libertarian in this sense. For example, suppose that instead of nudging Alex into getting the oatmeal, the restaurant owner influences her choice either by removing the option to order pancakes or by making the pancakes very expensive, thus removing the option of ordering cheap pancakes. Some see this as an infringement of autonomy. In many views, autonomous choice involves not only rationally choosing one's most preferred option, but also choosing from a sufficient range of options. I mean, yeah, but see, again, if we're talking about somebody having to make a monetary choice, that's a secondary choice to what we were talking about before. Now, why are we preferring one over the other here? Like, if you can't afford the $50 pancakes, then like, yeah. But again, you might still be healthy, but if you can't afford the healthy food or whatever it is, or if you can't afford the tasty food, then you're going to have to make the other one. But again, yeah, they're calling one autonomy and one not. I'm not sure why. But yeah. But yeah, okay, so in this setting, you need to have options to choose from where the options are all good options, as opposed to like one being exorbitantly priced. That's fair. In the case of ordering breakfast, this might seem trivial, but in other cases, the concern is more significant. Oh, that's true. We're talking medical. Medical procedures get very expensive. For example, in a medical context, suppose a doctor is positive that a treatment would not only benefit their patient, but also that the patient would in fact prefer to receive it. It still seems important that the doctor give the patient the opportunity to decide whether to receive it. Intuitively, it violates autonomy to force people to choose particular options or to deprive them of the opportunity to choose alternative options, even if this channels them to more preferred options. I mean, in America, you are allowed to be a moron. I don't know if that's the same everywhere, but like, you are allowed to be a moron here. Like, evolve yourselves, I don't know about friend, but acquaintance Gary. I mean, yeah, he's gonna get himself picked up by the cops and lose some friends, but he's allowed to be a bad drunk. Like, that's not illegal to be a bad drunk. It's illegal to be a bad drunk and then do stupid shit. Okay, we can now see why libertarian paternalism seems so attractive. On the standard model, a choice is autonomous so long as it's both rational and perhaps made from a sufficient range of options. Yeah, as long as you have a bunch of good options, you get to pick whichever one, then the idea that you can nudge someone into the good option seems nice. Violations of autonomy therefore either involve inducing people to choose dispreferred options or depriving them of options. Coercive forms of paternalism deprive people of options, but nudges are non-coercive. Really? I mean, they are less coercive, maybe. I don't know about non. And so only violate autonomy if they cause people to choose dispreferred options. On this model, actively reflecting on one's options and deciding for oneself is therefore important only insofar as it leads one to choose options that one already prefers. Such reflection may be important because even if one comes to a decision with settled values and trade-off rates between them, it isn't always obvious how to map these to one's options in order to determine one's preferences. One might lack self-knowledge or empirical information relevant to evaluating one's options. For example, one might have a settled trade-off rate between health and tastiness, but not appreciate how much one prefers the taste of pancakes or realize how much healthier oatmeal is. But importantly, so long as nudges don't lead one to choose dispreferred options and don't deprive one of options, there is simply no room to worry that they might infringe one's autonomy. Yeah, but this is what I'm going to go back. Like, they mentioned the thing where, like, maybe you don't realize how tasty those pancakes are. But propaganda works. Advertising works. Like, it works. Propaganda nowadays is very effective because if all you see is propaganda, then that's basically removing options, I guess. But, like, maybe even if the options exist, but you've got so much propaganda going into one supporting one area over the other, then the question is that going to undermine your rational choices for what you want to do because you just are overwhelmed? You can get overwhelmed, and I guess maybe that would be considered coercive to overwhelm people with propaganda. But again, this is blurring the line on what actually counts as non-coercive paternalism, the libertarian side, and what isn't coercive, because I don't think that's a very clear line right there. Okay, anywho, I mean, I'm not even arguing with the paper. In this view, the libertarian paternalist thing, basically it wants you to have a selection of options that are all good options, and then you get to choose your choice. I'm saying that's overly idealistic at times, but on that theory, it doesn't sound that bad either. And that's usually always my problem with libertarians, is it's overly simplistic, but that's a different discussion. The non-standard model. Although there are many ways one might depart from the standard model, for our purposes only a slight departure is necessary. We may continue to assume that people have settled values and they sometimes have settled trade-off rates between them, yielding, all things considered, preferences over options. However, the key difference is that we no longer assume that these preferences are complete. In some cases, a person prefers A to B in some respects, prefers B to A in others, but has no all things considered preference between the two, nor is the person all things considered indifferent between them. When this occurs, a person faces what we earlier called a hard choice. It might seem like there are no genuine cases of hard choices and that their distinctive difficulty is merely apparent. Either the alternatives are exactly equally good, in which case the chooser is simply indifferent, or else the chooser is missing information about the alternatives. I mean, in theory that's the case, but it's the old thing from like Kill Bill, like which one do you choose more? And Bill said, L says, a little bit of both. He says, well, bullshit. I know it's a little bit of both. And she says, well, which one is it? One a little bit more than the other. But when you have to answer something immediately because there's a medical decision, you don't always have the luxury of reflection or all the information available to you at that time. But the author says, to see why this isn't always so, consider a classic example of a hard choice, deciding between two career options. Should you be a doctor or a philosopher? The idea that like philosopher is a career, that's funny. Well, there are pros and cons on each side. For example, doctors get to interact with patients and their families and make a real concrete impact on their lives. You know that you would find this rewarding and that you would also benefit from the higher salary. I mean, zero is anything's higher than zero though, so for a philosopher. I mean, you're not paid to be a philosopher, you're paid to be an academic nowadays. But philosophers do not have to make life or death decisions and have more freedom to explore whatever questions they find interesting and more flexibility in how they spend their time. Maybe. This too appeals to you. So which career should you choose? Yeah, so yeah, we can just let the author say what they're going to say. I mean, it's funny to me. Sometimes even significant life choices like this are relatively easy. After weighing the considerations, one finds that one indeed prefers one option to the other. Yeah, benefits include actual employment. Thank you, Valpo. But other times, even after careful deliberation and even after gathering all the relevant information, neither option prevails. Although there may be some cases where this occurs because one is perfectly indifferent, the considerations on each side exactly balance out. More often, this kind of case seems to involve incomplete preferences. I mean, it's very simple. You can say you don't know the future. And so the idea that you're operating under complete knowledge is false. You don't know what's going to happen, and so you don't know everything about all the jobs, and so you can't possibly know how you're going to react to these things, and so you're going to be under incomplete information. You can know as much as you can know about yourself as a person and not know what's going to happen in the future. That's not like even under discussion. So all of our choices are in some sense incomplete information. It is a massive oversimplification when we have complete information, but like, I mean, that's what you're working with in these toy examples. Like, you know that you prefer pancakes over like oatmeal, but like, again, pancakes over oatmeal is like the simplest of fucking choices. Like, it really is. Although it's funny, I remember when I was in college, the hardest decision I had to make every day, because I had the meal plan when I was in college. So you'd go into the like cafeteria and, you know, you got those soda machines where you have like 8 or 9 different kinds of sodas. That was the hardest decision I had every day, because, you know, I had to do all the other things, but I had basically equal preferences for all the sodas after a while, because, you know, you drink the same shit every day when you have a meal plan. And that was actually my hardest decision. And I tell people this and they're like, that's weird. I was like, I don't think that's weird. I think you just haven't really considered how regimented your life is in college. But yeah, me way back when. Okay, the test for whether a very small improvement to one option would tip the balance and lead one to prefer that option. For example, would one come to prefer to be a doctor if the salary was raised by 1%? If one were perfectly indifferent beforehand, the slight increase in salary would decide the case. You would now prefer to be a doctor. But there certainly seem to be many cases where small improvements are not decisive in this way. In these cases, one faces a genuinely hard choice. If one does not prefer A to B or B to A, but neither one is indifferent between the two. Yeah. I mean, I actually haven't heard it before. This is a cutesy way of getting people to choose. Like, so if you change one little thing by some insignificant amount, would you go for that way? Then you'd know it was equal. Otherwise, then it's a question of incomplete information, not complete equality of preference. You might think that the rational response to a hard choice and to indifference is one and the same. If one is indifferent between A and B, one should just arbitrarily pick one. It is the flip a coin method. Perhaps simply going for the most salient option or flipping a coin. Yeah, flip a coin. But this doesn't seem like the right response to a hard choice. Return to our case of deciding on a career. Thinking that one should simply flip a coin to decide whether to apply to medical school or graduate school in philosophy does not do justice to the difficulty of the choice and all that hangs in the balance. You know, the scene is this is in a bioethics journal. I wonder if this author is regretting going to philosophy school and we're thinking, I should have gone to med school. Of course, well, they may be a cross-listed JD and PhD. I'm not JD, MD, PhD. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if the author was, because a lot of people who do this stuff are both medical and doctors of philosophy. Of course, if everything exactly balanced out such that one were perfectly indifferent between the considerations of either side of the decision, then flipping a coin would be fine. Each option would be exactly equally good. But this isn't how hard choices present themselves. If they could be rationally or autonomously treated the same way as cases of indifference, they would not present to us as hard, but they do. This is not a good argument. This is just stating that we don't flip coins on important things because we don't think they're important, because we don't think that's a way of doing it. But I mean, we could if that's it. What exactly makes a hard decision hard is it's not the indifference, it is the lack of information. Because it either way is going to radically alter your life and in ways you don't understand and you can't understand before you do it, because a lot of these things, like, it can really change your physical body and people don't know what that is until that actually happens to them. How do we how would that, is there an easier way to say this? There's a literature on these hard decisions, on like life-changing decisions. Maybe that would have been a better. The author could have appealed to that literature here. I mean, I completely agree with what they're saying. I just don't think it was there was more that could. There's something else that could have been said there about the lack of information. That's why the small differences don't matter, because the choices in the end are going to be so radically change your life that the small changes don't matter. That's why it's not a matter of indifference. It's a matter of like lack of knowledge of the future. But anyway, again, not a knock on this author. It's just that there's a whole literature on this stuff that people worry about these things. And so it's not so much that the author is wrong. The argument's not great, but they're not wrong. It's just need to reference something else, in my opinion. Okay, how then is one to resolve hard choices? Following Chang, I propose that we resolve hard choices through a distinctive exercise of rational agency. When our accepted values and trade-off rates between them do not settle our preferences between A and B, the rational and autonomous thing to do is to settle one's preferences by deciding how to trade off the relevant values. So we're trading off values here. One arrives at a hard choice without a settled trade-off rate between, say, having a higher salary and having more flexibility. To choose autonomously in such a case, one must first settle which of these considerations one values more, and only then should one choose the option that better aligns with one's values. So, I mean, this is just saying, well, then you have to figure yourself out first. Okay. We might put this by saying that while the standard model of autonomous choice only makes room for decisional autonomy, that is the sort of autonomy involved in choosing your most preferred option from a suitable menu, the non-standard model makes room for what I call formative autonomy. That is the sort of autonomy involved in settling the trade-off rates between one's values and so settling one's preferences. And since our identity significantly depends on our values and the weights we assign them, formative autonomy is important. It involves choosing the sort of person that one is or will be. Yeah, so this is the know thyself. I mean, this person's a philosopher. They're saying you have to figure out who you are, and then you can decide, like, what kind of person do you want to be, and then you get to say, well, based on the person I really want it to be, after more consideration, then I'll be a medical doctor or a doctor of philosophy. But the ability to decide for yourself the kind of person you want to be, they're saying, is going to be problematic if you're getting nudged at that point, because you don't have a set preference. So this is just where I think they're going, is that if you don't have set preferences on what you want to be, then someone is molding you, basically. You're not being nudged into the thing you already chose, but they're going to be molding you in ways that you were not in control of, violating the libertarian ideals that were stated earlier. So the non-standard model then opens the door to a different way we might violate someone's autonomy, insofar as it seems important to our formative autonomy that we actively settle our preferences for ourselves when faced with hard choices. We might respect someone's decisional autonomy, yet violate their formative autonomy. And as I will now argue, even granting defenders of nudges that they leave decisional autonomy intact, their adherence to the standard model blinds them to the effect of nudges on formative autonomy. In the next section, I elaborate this point. In the following section, I suggest that this is an especially important consideration in medical contexts. Yeah, I can see why this is like, and I've said this before, but all these authors we read here on Philosophy Roulette, they're really smart people. And if you're thinking something, it's usually because they want you to be thinking it. So. So, yeah, and why this is important in medical context, what they're saying right here, is because a lot of people will not have had the opportunity to think of like the kind of person they're going to be. Like if you have to actually decide whether you want to try to give up like parts of your body or your life for other things, that's not the sort of thing people, consider when they're young. like I think my cousin was deciding whether he wanted to get like some sort of laser eye surgery, and they gave him glasses that would show him what it would be like, and he was like he had to get reading glasses. Like he didn't realize that the eye surgery he would lose his short-term not short-term is his closeness, like his short, like he'd become short-sighted. Now my cousin spends a lot of his day on his phone. He's like looking at his phone all the time. He don't want to have to put glasses on every time he looks at his phone. So I was like, maybe he's happy with the not very good long range sight, because he's always on his phone. Hi, if you're out there, because he sometimes watches. Yeah, I mean, being him, he'll just wait for he'll just hope the medical technology gets better, and it might. Okay, nudges and formative autonomy. It might seem hyperbolic to say that if we are at risk of objectively violating an important aspect of someone's autonomy, whenever they face a hard choice. Return to Alex's breakfast decision between pancakes and oatmeal, but suppose now that this is a hard choice. Alex prefers pancakes in one respect, oatmeal in another, but has no all things considered preference between the two. Yeah, this is me at the soda counter. Now, suppose the restaurant owner decides to implement a two-menu policy to nudge patrons into making healthier breakfast options. A two-menu policy? What's that? The default menu only lists healthy options, but diners who wish to order something more indulgent can request the supplementary menu. A two-menu policy might very well undermine Alex's formative autonomy by leading her to order oatmeal without first actively settling the conflict between her values for health and taste, or by settling this conflict for her. But even granting as much, this does not seem cause for serious concern. When it comes to mundane hard choices of this sort, choices where the stakes of the decision are sufficiently low, it does not seem particularly objectionable to infringe formative autonomy by way of a nudge. Breakfast decisions are paradigmatically mundane choices. But some hard choices have decidedly higher stakes, and when they do, violations of formative autonomy seem more troubling. Consider again a hard career choice, doctor or philosopher. In a case of this sort, where one's choice will make a significant impact on the sort of person one will be or the life one will lead, it's important that one settles one's values for oneself. Let's say, again, following Chang, that a person drifts into a career as a doctor if they pick that career, but without first settling on a preference for being a doctor over a philosopher. They choose to be a doctor not because of a decision about what to value or what kind of person to be, but rather, say, because it feels like the path of least resistance. Such a person lives a less thoroughly autonomous life than someone who has committed to a career as a doctor and thrown their agency behind the decision. This may come out in the sense of alienation they feel from themselves and their own life pursuits. They never really settled on being a doctor, and so were not able to rationally decide to become one, but rather simply found themselves with this identity and career. And this may remain true even if, after drifting into being a doctor, they develop a preference for being one, but only as a result of an adaptive preference for the new status quo. In this case, the cost to their autonomy comes not from the fact that they lack a settled preference, but rather from the fact that they never settled their preferences for themselves. Their preferences were settled by external forces, and they never had a chance to exercise their formative autonomy. They never decided how to weigh their values or what kind of person to be. Yes and no. I mean, it's, again, this is the sort of thing, like, how can you actually know these things, about how you want to live the life and how, like, if you're asking some kid, because in the United States, you go to college between, like, after high school a lot of times. I know in Europe, sometimes you have to decide even younger, not even 18, sometimes I think 16. I don't know how it is in other places in the world. But it's like you're asking someone to make big life decisions where they are not really in a position to have all the information at that point. And so they can choose to like be listless, and then they can choose that because they know they don't know. So it's like, yes, that they had their decisions made for them, but like, again, what is the grand claim that we actually ever had this sort of formative autonomy anyway? I'm not sure about that. But like, yeah, again, I don't completely disagree with the author here. It's just I have these like nagging background questions about this sort of a libertarian view of the world. Okay. Let us say that a choice is momentous if it's both a hard choice and one that is high stakes in the sense described above, that is, it isn't mundane. Although the precise boundary between mundane and momentous choices is difficult to specify, as we have just seen, there are many cases of hard choices falling on the momentous side of the boundary. When it comes to such momentous choices, it's important to respect someone's formative autonomy by allowing them to settle their preferences for themselves, or even by facilitating the conditions under which they can do so. Nudges and other interventions designed without this in mind might seriously infringe their formative autonomy. Yeah, this is the sort of thing, like, again, we can go back to the abortion case in the United States, where people have very strong opinions about this, and they're trying to get people to follow what they think is the right way. And so if someone has not yet made up their mind about it because they hadn't been in the position or just never thought about it before, then all of a sudden they're going to be bombarded with information from people who have set preferences and agendas. So, author says, we can bring this out by imagining that someone facing a momentous career choice is nudged one way or the other. Suppose someone deciding whether to be a doctor or philosopher attends a counseling meeting with her academic advisor. At the meeting, she learns that her advisor has taken it upon himself to pre-register her for pre-med courses next year. He also provides pamphlets with information about how to study for the MCAT and which medical schools have alumni on their admissions committees. When she mentions that she loves philosophy and is also seriously considering a career as a professor, he says that's her choice, and if she wants, she can cancel her enrollment in the pre-med track and register for philosophy, giving up a career in medicine in pursuit of a career in academia. In other words, throughout the entire discussion, he presents a career in medicine as the default option she would be losing out on if she decided to opt out of it, and a career in philosophy as something that she might elect to opt into if she wishes to pursue a different path. The academic advisor employs two well-known sorts of nudges, one involving people's tendency to stick with the default option, and another involving the tendency to be averse to options that are presented as losses. Consider, for example, that he might have instead pre-registered her for philosophy classes, yet told her it was up to her whether she wishes to opt out and so lose her chance to pursue a career in philosophy. Such nudges are surprisingly effective and might very well cause the individual in question to stick with the path of least resistance and drift into the career she is nudged into, without settling for herself what she really prefers. This seems like a problematic infringement of her formative autonomy. A different, better academic advisor would listen to his advisee and encourage her to take the time to carefully weigh her options and settle her preferences for herself. You know, this is a good example, finally. We got one. I was waiting for them to have a nice example where you can set up a thing where one option seems like the easier one, so you can just sort of drift into that. Again, here's the weird background thing that's going on in my head. All of these options are going to be the way they're presented. Do you really think you can get away with getting away from nudges? All these things are going to be nudges in different ways. Like, all the information given is given by people who have agendas. All of them. So the philosophers are going to have agendas. The doctors, the medical doctors, are going to have agendas. And so they're just going to be of a different sort. And so for some reason, when it's clearly manufactured by the advisor, we think that's bad. But when it's sort of generically manufactured by various different agents, then it's making up your mind. Why? I don't know. But we think that. But, like, again, I don't have a problem with this author here. It does seem like there is a difference between them, but I'm not entirely sure where exactly the line is. So, Yeah, does that make sense? I don't know. I think it does, because like every little thing that like information pamphlets. Imagine you got like a little information pamphlet, or like you're reading your class descriptions. Like I know we got professors and students in a lot of times come in my chat. Every time you read like a class description, that's a little advertisement for that class that that professor wants you to take, because professors need to have people in their classes a lot of times. I mean, if you get tenure, not always as much, but they still want you to think the class is interesting, like so that they have like someone to teach. So it's like this is the same sort of thing. Those are full of little nudges and things where they're trying to get you to think like this is a great idea. We can imagine two problematic outcomes in this case. First, the advisee might never settle their preferences and so find themselves in a career they do not prefer, never having settled whether their other career path would better align with their values. Second, they might eventually come to prefer their life as a doctor through a process of preference adaptation. In this latter case, the cost of formative autonomy is arguably greater. Rather than allowing the student to settle her own preferences, the academic advisor managed to impose preferences on her and settle them on her behalf. One can hardly think of a more paradigmatic violation of autonomy than others imposing their ends or preferences on you, a clear case of heteronomy. Valpo says, there's post-tenure review now. Yeah, so you can't even get tenure and feel safe. That's wonderful. Again, yeah, see, this author really seems like they're from taking this hard line on libertarianism. I mean, Fabry says, so even the few tenured folks who remain have to hustle. That, like, isn't that just violating the whole point of tenure then, like, to give people a break and, like, say, go work on what you want because you're smart, and we recognize that now? It's like, it's a weird situation in academia. But yeah, one thing I want to say is that sometimes people know better than you do. They might know you better than you. I know a guy, he was given a very good job, and the guy worked out over the course of his life. It, like, really everything worked out great for this guy and, like, the community that he was in and stuff like that. And he was like, I don't understand why, like, I was given this job. I mean, everything worked out great, but, like, I don't understand. I said, well, maybe that guy who gave you that job knew something about you and the community and, like, where you'd be working and why it would work out. Sometimes that's a good thing. And so the idea that, like, you don't have this libertarian, like, not everyone's going to know all the things. So the idea that you are settling it for yourself when you are not within all the information, sometimes you do have to rely on others. And I find this a little bit, like, they're saying how bad this is to formative autonomy. You don't always want kids making decisions. They're not going to form the right thoughts about themselves because kids are dumb, and they're not, even if they're forming it for themselves, that doesn't mean they actually understand what they're doing. And so sometimes the libertarian, like, this is just rubbing me the wrong way, this libertarianism. It's like sometimes other people know stuff about you that you don't know. It's like the old, like, joke is that, like, oh, we all knew that they were gay before, like, they knew it. But, like, yeah, or, like, those two were in love and, like, they didn't realize it. Like, people know stuff about other people. Like, they're not dumb people a lot of times. Like, people know shit. And so it's like, are you violating their autonomy by setting them up together? It's like, well, yeah, like, you're setting people up to be great. And it's like, was their autonomy violated? Yes, but in this case, it's like, it's not important. And so I think the author's a little bit overblown this argument here about, like, how bad this is. You can hardly think of a more paradigmatic violation of autonomy than like right here. One can hardly think of a more paradigmatic violation of autonomy than others imposing their ends and preferences on you. It may be a great thing that, like, someone, sets you on the right path. Like, really. Like, someone can set you on the right path. That's a good thing. You may not know it at the time, but, like, that doesn't make them wrong. It's like, oh my God, their autonomy was violated. Yes, they were idiots when they were younger. That's a good thing that someone set you on the right path then. Okay. To be clear, author says, to be clear, I am not arguing that it's always bad for someone that they drift or even for their preferences to be settled for them by some external agent. Okay, good. They're not being they realize that's a little overblown right there. Causing someone to drift is morally objectionable when it is, not because it necessarily makes the person worse off, but because its effect on the drifter's autonomy. Again, this is a very libertarian take where the autonomy is like sacred. Settling one's preferences is an exercise of formative autonomy. When one causes someone to drift, one deprives them of an opportunity to exercise their autonomy, or at least steers them away from this opportunity, and so causes them to lead a less thoroughly autonomous life. Yeah, again, thoroughly autonomous life. Like, who do you really think you are that you are so autonomous? Even if this isn't as severe as infringement as the case where one imposes a new preference on them, it's still an infringement. Of course, this isn't to say that autonomy, or specifically formative autonomy, must take priority in biomedical analysis. Sometimes infringing autonomy may be, all things considered, what we ought to do. My claim is that nudges are typically justified on the grounds that they influence choice without infringing autonomy, and for important class of cases, momentous choices, this isn't true. And see, this is why I was saying I disagree with the person, but like I think I'm not like very angry with them. When you're talking about stuff that like people don't really understand, like these momentous choices, like where you don't have very much information, then you are really choosing for them, like by pushing them one way or the other. And that's fair. You should not be necessarily making massive decisions when it comes to medical stuff, especially when they're adults. It's one thing if you're, the example when a kid's trying to go to school, maybe they don't really understand all the things that's involved. But if you're talking about like an older person who's like doing end of life decisions, who are you to like make to tell them like their experience and what they should think? You should let them, make as best a decision as can be made by those people. Okay. Before going on, it's worth noting how the recognition of formative autonomy not only makes room for this new way that nudges might violate autonomy, but also undercuts a common defense of nudges. Some people defend nudges on the grounds that they are only likely to work in cases where people lack strong preferences to begin with, such that they are unlikely ever to lead individuals to choose strongly dispreferred options. For example, if our advisee strongly preferred a career in philosophy, then her advisor's nudges would not be successful. She would be more resistant to them. This resistibility defense of nudges makes sense on the standard model, on which people have complete preferences such that nudges can violate autonomy only by causing them to choose a less preferred option or by restricting the options from which they choose. But it no longer makes sense once we realize that cases in which people lack strong preferences might involve hard choices rather than near indifference. Indeed, we might worry that precisely because people lack preferences in contexts of hard choices, they are especially susceptible to nudges. But this clearly isn't an adequate defense of nudges once we realize that nudging people in cases where they lack preferences may violate their autonomy in a way that nudging them in cases of indifference does not. Rather, if it's true that people are more resistant to nudges when they have a strong preference against the option... This is a lot of words. Rather, if it's true that people are more resistant to nudges when they have a strong preference against the option they are being nudged into, this suggests that nudges may be especially likely to violate formative autonomy in the context of hard and specifically momentous choices where they lack preferences altogether. The resistibility defense gets things backwards in context of momentous choice. Yeah, so it's a question of information. If you already have everything decided, which is the author's standard model, then you might make things a little bit harder, but they're still going to understand like the decision that they're making between what they rationally should and what the other options are. When people don't have enough information about themselves and their future, then you are basically taking away options for them deciding for themselves about themselves, and that's a problem. And I can see why the libertarian would be very unhappy with that. Yeah, so if you're like this medical libertarian where you should always be, trying to make yourself better and like it's up to you, like the choices you make, like you should see that like you are operating under incomplete information at any given point, and therefore it's very important that you cultivate yourself. And this is going to like the Stoic philosophy and a little bit of the Cynic philosophy. You need to cultivate yourself so that you can understand yourself, therefore make the correct sort of decision about how you want your future to go, especially in these cases where it makes a big deal, like momentous choices. How long have I been streaming? Okay, an hour and a half. Yeah, almost done with this, I think. We got one page. Oh no, we got a bunch more. Okay, so we'll see. Yeah, I always forget these double column things. They're quite long. Okay, momentous choices in medical context. I've argued that nudges risk violating formative autonomy in context of momentous choice. What remains to be seen is why this is especially worrisome in medical settings. My aim in this section is to elucidate this worry by considering several choices patients face in medical settings that qualify as momentous in the sense characterized above. These are cases where patients must make high-stakes choices about their clinical care, but where it seems especially likely that they have incomplete preferences over their options. They have conflicting values that may not determine one option as best. In such cases, deciding requires exercising one's formative autonomy, resolving preference incompleteness by settling the weights of one's values, settling one's preferences, and so deciding what kind of person to be. So, in designing nudges for use in medical contexts, we must be especially sensitive to the existing momentous choices. Unfortunately, existing work on nudges in medical settings seems to overlook this worry. Imagine a woman, call her Kat, who books an appointment with her gynecologist after experiencing some unusual discomfort and cramping. After a series of tests, the doctor reveals to Kat that she is pregnant. Kat is ambivalent. She loves children, but now doesn't seem to be the right time, while she is still completing her degree. She has a loving partner, but they never imagined having children, if ever, before getting married and settling down into stable jobs. Still, when she thinks about having a baby, she feels happy and tender and excited. And even though Kat fiercely believes that people should have the right to decide whether to terminate pregnancy, deep down she feels some moral compunction about having an abortion herself. Kat must decide whether she wants to continue her pregnancy, and there are clearly many relevant considerations pulling her in both directions. Kat values her education and the prospect of a fulfilling and rewarding career. Fucking capitalist. But she also is drawn to the idea of becoming a mother and has some moral reservations about having an abortion. In weighing up these various considerations, it seems reasonable to assume that at least sometimes people in Kat's circumstances find themselves genuinely unable to regard one option as all things considered better than the other. And it seems furthermore reasonable that many such cases do not involve indifference. It isn't as if the decision would become straightforward and easy if we made one option slightly more attractive, for example by slightly decreasing the monetary cost of abortion or child care. People in Kat's position therefore sometimes face hard choices in the sense that they have incomplete preferences over their options, and these choices are clearly momentous. They are high stakes, making a significant difference to the life that person will lead or the kind of person they will be. Kat might therefore face a momentous choice that provides an opportunity for her to exercise her formative autonomy. Before she can decide whether to continue her pregnancy, she must settle her preferences by determining what she values most. Yeah, again, this is a standard example in the literature discussing radical epistemology, like big epistemic changes. And so there's been books on this recently. Where people talk about like these exact things. And this is the thing, it's like this is in the literature. It's a little disappointing, as I was saying earlier, that there is a whole literature that's talking about momentous choices, about things you don't know, like epistemologies you don't understand, what it is to be a mother, and how do you make that decision under the lack of knowledge about what's going to happen to you and your life given that thing. So it's just unfortunate because there's like a nice overlap here between some of the metaphysics and epistemology, and now the biomedical ethics can talk about the same, and it's a missed opportunity, I feel. Okay, this is just one example of a medical context where momentous choices are likely sometimes to arise. The basic algorithm for identifying such contexts is to look for cases where 1. There are important high-stakes considerations on both sides of a decision, and 2. When patients have difficulty deciding between their options, the difficulty isn't always resolved by slightly improving one of the options, for example by making the option slightly less expensive. This is because momentous decisions are hard choices with high stakes, and condition 1 ensures that the choice is high stakes, while condition 2 ensures that it's sometimes hard. And sure enough, there are many medical contexts satisfying both conditions. Consider the following partial list. Patients must decide whether to continue with invasive chemotherapy that is unlikely to work and live in pain and discomfort, or to die comfortably in hospice care, whether to undergo risky but ultimately cosmetic surgery, whether to donate a kidney, how to medically transition in light of gender dysphoria, whether to accept a life-saving treatment that violates strongly held religious convictions, whether to get a cochlear implant later in life, whether to participate in experimental research with no prospect of direct benefit, and so on. Each of these decisions involves important considerations on each side. Each of these examples involves a decision that is often difficult in the colloquial sense, and where this difficulty isn't always resolved by slightly improving one of the options, suggesting that such choices are indeed sometimes hard in the technical sense defined above. Medical contexts are rife with momentous choices. This connection to nudges is obvious. The connection to nudges is obvious. In many of the medical contexts in which I have just suggested momentous choices are likely to arise, we've already begun to nudge patients without thinking about any of this. Consider, for example, nudges designed to steer reproductive choices. In the wake of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, okay, so is this paper, when did this, so this might be a contemporary paper where the right to abortion is now up to the states, and so I think that's what's going on here. This paper is actually in response to losing the right to have an abortion here in the United States. Okay, in the wake of Planned Parenthood v. Casey, several regulations that influence the right to choose an abortion have been proposed and upheld on the basis that they do not prohibit a person from exercising this right, but rather ensure that their consent is appropriately informed and the product of a careful deliberation. Examples of such regulation include requirements that seeking abortions observe a waiting period, receive information about fetus's moral and legal status, view an ultrasound, and listen to a fetus heartbeat. This case is complicated since the stated justification for many of these nudges is that they give people time to reflect seriously on their decision and ensure that the decision is voluntary. However, in practice, many of these nudges seem instead to set the default as continuing pregnancy. Aha, and now we know the truth. This person has set this paper up in a libertarian sense because a lot of the U.S. is set up in the sort of libertarian way, and this paper is railing against the these laws that nudge people away from pregnancy. So that's what's going on here. That's why I'm kind of like, I don't understand what's going on with this like hardcore libertarian bent. Now we've gotten there. This whole paper is designed to take the libertarian justifications that people are using in the United States to undermine abortion rights and turn them against the people themselves. So it's like right here, this whole thing, like right here, this is the entire kicker. Okay, good on you, author. Like, I was wondering what the setup was here, but like, this is, again, we've read other papers where we've been set up, and it's actually in feminist studies or something. It looks like this is what happens every so often. It's very clever, but like, if you're going to write a setup paper, this is how to do it. You write a paper from the perspective of whatever the underlying theory is of the people you are arguing against, and you basically, you're setting it up to fail, and fail hard. And that's exactly what just happened here. We were talking about all this stuff, then we got to this very contemporary thing, this Planned Parenthood versus Casey in the United States, and you set up where all these people are claiming to say one thing, but then it violates the libertarian theory that, you know, they basically are standing on. All right. Author says, to my knowledge, there are no states requiring someone to deliberate carefully for 24 hours or to read or watch videos depicting how hectic their life will become once they have children before deciding not to terminate their pregnancy, nor do states mandate providing information about the risks of continuing a pregnancy and giving birth, which are generally significantly higher than early abortion. My point here, again, isn't to argue that all nudges are ethically problematic, but rather that we need to be careful about the effect of nudges on formative autonomy in context of momentous choice. And it seems safe to say that whether to become a parent is often a momentous choice. Yeah, and here it is. What I was complaining about. Why don't you talk about the similar phenomenon that's going on in the literature, Transformative Experience by L.A. Paul. So I wonder if this was from a reviewer. Or like, yeah, one of the reviewers says, hey, look, what you're talking about is exactly the same thing as here. And so you got to throw in a reference. So we finally got there. I was just saying, why haven't you discussed this in all of these other choices? Because they're ready-made choices. So it's right here. It's like in this footnote 21. Another nudge generating this concern pertains to patients' choices about end-of-life care. Halpern and colleagues have done fascinating work on the effect of default options on advanced care. Valpo, yeah, I think the Ellie Paul stuff is actually, I don't know if it's great, but I think it's good. But I'm with you. I think it's nice stuff. I was telling someone about it, and they were just like, that's the most ridiculous shit I've ever heard. And I was like, yeah, I can see why some people, I was like, a lady, she was like, she was like, she had some kids. She was like, no, like, yeah, you can think about, like, being a parent without actually being a parent. It's not that hard. Go take care of someone's kids for a little while. It's like, it's not that crazy. I mean, of course, that depends on your kids, but, like, that's the whole point. It's like, it's momentous, but, like, for some people, it's not as big a deal. So it depends on the person a lot of times. But yeah, she was just like, nah, it's like, she was like, this is kind of overblown. And the person I was talking to knows her epistemology and stuff, so like, this was another philosopher. So it was just like, yeah, I thought her opinion was really funny. Like, just like, meh. Okay. Halpern and colleagues have done fascinating work on the effect of default options on advanced care planning documents, testing whether even deeply personal and important choices can be influenced by defaults. And it turns out that they can. Defaults strongly affect the treatment choices seriously ill patients make when completing advanced directives. Advanced directives, of course, is like life-ending sort of choices. Patients completing advanced directives in which comfort-oriented care was the default were significantly more likely to choose comfort-oriented treatment options than were patients completing advanced directives without specified defaults. And patients completing advanced directives in which life-extending care was the default were significantly more likely to choose life-extending care. Halpern et al. Suggest that these results raise the possibility that people might not have strongly held views on what forms of care at the end of life best promote their values. Yeah, I mean, people only get to the end of their life once. So, the idea that people were thinking about this, I mean, some people will think about this, but most of the time people, at least I think the majority of people, go on without thinking so hard about end-of-life stuff. So, yeah. In a follow-up paper, Gorin et al. Argue that this is further confirmed by the fact that even after being debriefed about the manipulation of the default, no patient revised their choices. Defaults do not push people in directions they would strongly prefer not to go, because if they did, people would either override the default initially or more frequently revise their nudged choices. Since patients don't do this, they conclude that the emerging evidence is that defaults do not necessarily override patient preferences, and that, on reflection, patients tend to endorse their nudged choices. The normative implication they draw is that, in cases where patients appear to lack settled preferences in this way, nudges are especially appropriate. When patients lack authentic preferences over their treatment options and are therefore likely to make important decisions under the influence of trivial and irrelevant features of their choice environments, clinicians and policymakers are justified in using nudges in accordance with the best interest standard. Yeah, so it's saying basically people are adopting what they're getting given by the doctors at this point. They're adopting those preferences. It's like they're not having strong preferences, otherwise they would change once they will say, hey, maybe, the way it was presented was bad. They just say no, or they stick with it. And so it's like they're adopting the formative, they're forming their opinion based on the choices given to them. Gorin et al.'s treatment of nudges is unusually thoughtful, insofar as it acknowledges that patients may have incomplete preferences over their options. I single them out only because their analysis of cases of incomplete preferences clearly exemplifies the failure of choice architects to acknowledge the existence and importance of formative autonomy. Gorin et al. Believe that, in cases of incomplete preferences, there can be no serious objection to nudges since they don't conflict with patient preferences. But the argument of this paper has been that incomplete preferences provide opportunities to exercise formative autonomy, and so should make us wary of, rather than enthusiastic about, implementing nudges. It's precisely because patients lack settled preferences about what end-of-life care option best promotes their values that nudging them risks objectionably violating their autonomy. As we have already seen, claiming that defaults do not do not push people in directions they would strongly prefer not to go isn't a good defense of nudging in circumstances of momentous choice where it seems especially important that people settle their preferences for themselves. That said, Gorin et al. Also emphasizes the importance of supplementing nudges with processes of joint decision-making between physicians and patients. This aspect of their discussion is highly welcome. It's true that physicians can help patients make momentous choices by providing them an opportunity for reflecting as well as the information they need to weigh their value and settle their preferences. And insofar as we can nudge patients into making momentous choices for themselves, insofar as we can nudge patients into making momentous choices for themselves, I mean, just yell at them until they decide. This may be a way of enhancing formative autonomy. For example, a patient who might otherwise be likely to drift down the path of least resistance might be nudged into stopping and reflecting on the values underlying their decision and how they wish to settle the corresponding trade-offs. All right, this is just them being philosophers and saying, hey, if we really encourage someone to think, they're going to think. My dear friend, I mean, maybe, but like, I don't know if you can lead a person to philosophy. You cannot make them think. Indeed, as Mance et al. Have shown, it's sometimes possible to nudge physicians into having difficult conversations with patients of the sort that can empower patients to exercise their formative autonomy in making momentous choices. All right, well, this is fair. You can get physicians to do a better job explaining things to the patients, and then the patients will have a better understanding of what's going on. And then, yeah, that's a good thing right here. But it's like, my sweet child, you cannot make people think. I mean, you just can't. So again, the upshot isn't that we should abandon nudges. First, nudges may be perfectly appropriate in a wide class of a decision context where we have no reason to think that patients face hard choices, let alone momentous ones. For example, nudging patients into eating healthy food is not plausibly a significant violation of their formative autonomy, since even if the choice is hard, it's not momentous. Nor is nudging them into getting cheaper but equally effective generic drugs rather than the brand name alternative, since this isn't plausibly a hard choice. Second, neither autonomy in general nor formative autonomy specifically is the only moral consideration relevant to evaluating the use of nudges. So even in cases where nudges violate formative autonomy, they may be all things considered justified, say, because of the extent to which they promote a patient's interests or broader social benefits. Yeah, again, this is the like, maybe someone doesn't know enough to actually make the decision and they need a hand at like getting pushed in the right direction. Author says, I've taken no stand on how to weigh such competing considerations here, but have merely argued that we make a serious moral mistake if we follow the standard model and so ignore the potential for nudges to violate formative autonomy. Finally, what's interesting here is I suspect the people who are going to be assholes about this, the ones that, want people to do what they want to do, think that it's a good thing to be paternalistic and get people to follow them because they think they're right about everything. So I mean that's part of the trouble with people who think they're right about everything, is they force everyone else to like listen to their crap, and then you end up that being the default, go with them. But yeah, so I mean that is one of the this is still philosophy. It's a very hopeful thing that anyone's going to change their mind about it. I don't know if the author actually thinks anyone who they disagree with would change their mind about this sort of stuff, but it's like, yeah, this seems a little bit they know that people, like, they haven't argued for like how to weigh all the different like things going on, like when is it okay to be paternalistic. But yeah, it's like they can argue for what they want in this paper, but I don't know if it's going to have practical results in terms of like the US and people here. But that's fine. I mean, philosophy generally, it's very hard to get people to change their mind anyway, philosophical writing or not. Anywho, finally, in context of momentous choice, it may be possible to nudge patients in ways that promote formative autonomy by encouraging patients to make decisions for themselves, although further work on this sort of nudge is needed. Yeah, because that's what I was saying earlier, like, what does it mean to get people to think for themselves? For example, although I above expressed some reservations about the use of mandatory waiting periods and ultrasounds to shape reproductive decisions, my misgivings about these nudges are based primarily in their asymmetrical use to steer pregnant people away from obtaining an abortion. In other contexts, nudging patients to reflect seriously on momentous choices or nudging healthcare providers to facilitate such reflection may be an effective way of promoting formative autonomy by encouraging patients to contemplate their options before deciding. And this, by the way, provides a response to what is sometimes called the inevitability defense of nudges, namely that choice architecture is unavoidable, so there is no point in worrying about it. Some choice architecture is indeed unavoidable, but it can nevertheless be designed or shaped in better or worse ways, for example, in ways that either promote or violate formative autonomy. My worry only arises then in cases where we are trying to nudge patients who face momentous choices in a particular way into choosing without first settling their preference for themselves. Yeah, this is what I was saying earlier too. It's that like no matter what you're doing, you're being advertised to. Like, so given a selection of options, it's still an advertisement. Who's to say that the selection being presented in front of you is a fair representation? And so this is what they're saying here is like, well, it's always going to have some of this. It's like, yeah, and it's fair. Some of it can be better or worse. But again, who gets to decide what is better or worse then? Okay, conclusion. Nudges have made their way into medical settings, and it's easy to see why. Healthcare providers should conform to the principle of beneficence. They should promote their patients' health and welfare. At the same time, they should respect patient autonomy and allow patients to make choices that align with their values for themselves. A thoughtful, implemented nudge can thread the needle between beneficence and autonomy by helping doctors steer their patients toward decisions that align with their own values without preventing them from choosing otherwise. In many cases, enthusiasm for clinical nudges is warranted, but some nudges are more concerning, specifically those involving momentous choices. In this paper, I've argued that medical contexts often involve such choices. There are high-stakes choices requiring patients to choose between options over which they have incomplete preferences. In context of momentous choice, choosing autonomously requires settling our preferences and deciding which of our values to prioritize. Despite their other virtues, nudges can interfere with this process. This consideration has been overlooked in existing discussions of nudges in general and clinical nudges specifically. Respect for autonomy requires that we not overlook it any longer. All right. Yeah, I quite like this paper. Like I said, it looked like a bit of a setup to me, which is fine. Like I thought it was done well. So it was the whole paper was basically saying, look, in the libertarian mindset, which a lot of the doctors, and I bet a lot of the people in the U.S. are, because they even mentioned the U.S. case. Yeah, she's at the NIH. Department of Bioethics at the National Institutes of Health, which is a big thing in the United States. So yeah. So this was a setup basically to talk to doctors and the general public who may be in this libertarian mindset that this is kind of an unfair and wrong way about going about stuff in terms of medical ethics because it violates autonomy. And, people in the U.S. really harp on autonomy quite often because of, they just do. The sort of libertarian ethic we have, like the individualism here. So anyway, I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about this. It's like, it seems like what they said was right. We've got these momentous changes. When you don't have a preference, you can get one forced on you and you end up going that way as your default. And, that's going to happen. And if you are in the sort of mindset where you have to make a decision for yourself, that's what we sort of believe here, then, this is interesting. This anonymous referee for encouraging the elaboration. I was going to comment on something right here where they said, look, it may be an effective way of promoting autonomy to like contemplate their options before deciding, where you have to show both options. Like, oh yeah, have you really considered how much sleep you're going to lose before, like when you become a parent. So this is interesting. That was a referee suggested that. But like that also goes to this entire sort of perspective of if you're a libertarian, then you have to show both options. And just showing the, benefits of motherhood does not, or like the anti-abortion stuff does not show the anti-motherhood stuff also. And so in that sense, it would be unfair to just show one as opposed to the other. Okay. But that's about it for this one.